it's not completely divorced from these bigger things that we do know about. There was actually one time during the book where I said out loud, oh no, which is, as you mentioned, there are 3 different routes, right? This isn't just one way, it's 3 different ways. But one of the places that they decide to send some things to is Nanking. And if you know World War II history, you know, they don't know it, but like that's going to be the scene of just one of the worst massacres in history. And that's one of the stops along the way. So, I mean, as you said, it's not like they put him somewhere and everything's fine. It's a constant movement for years. And some of those places ended up just being dang near wiped off the map.
Yeah, and 20,000 cases of art were still in Nanking in late November 1937, or when the Japanese were moving inland. Nanking was the capital of China at the time. And they only got the art out. They didn't succeed in getting it all out of Nanking. They got 17,000 cases out of Nanking just 10 days before the Japanese took the city. And as you say, you know, we all know what happened in Nanking when the Japanese took it. It was a terrible, terrible slaughter. And the conditions under which they got that art out are just really jaw-dropping. The city was literally burning as they did it. And there's discussion about, you know, it took hundreds of porters and it took trucks and it took steamships and it took railways and rolling stock to get that stuff out. And the art was prioritized over people. You know, people were trying to get out too at the same time. But steamships and rolling stock were put aside to get these 17,000 cases of imperial art treasures out when they could have been getting people out. But the government decided they were going to get the art out instead. So, you know, there's real kind of ethical questions around what was done, particularly at that moment as well, with everything that was to come.
And it feels like, too, that you took a little time in the book that Nanking wasn't just a stop, that you wanted to talk a little bit about what happened there. Was it something that you felt it was important to the story to add that? Was it something that when something is that historically significant, you wanted to add a little bit more to it? And especially, you talk about that as the Japanese are going through, there are certain places that, you know, international people are allowed to be, and the Japanese are kind of supposed to leave them alone. But these places were not secure. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the weird things about China in the early 20th century was it has these little bits of extraterritoriality. It had what we call the concessions, the foreign concessions. Foreign concessions were little bits of China that had been carved out and were administered by foreign powers. Some by the Brits, some by the French, some by the Germans, some by the Japanese, a bit by the Russians. And at different times, these little kind of islands of foreign administration existed all over eastern China. So there were always foreigners in China, and the Japanese kind of, as they invaded, they sort of moved around. They didn't take these foreign concessions. They kind of moved around them. They bypassed them. So you have these foreigners' accounts of everything that's going on because there were many foreigners in the concessions at the time. So that adds a lot to our understanding of what China went through. There were quite a lot of foreigners in Nanking at the time when the Japanese took it. We have their diaries, which tell us a lot about what took place there. Because the art went through that city and because of its significance in the wartime story, I felt I couldn't just not talk about it. I felt I had to do something. But the Nanking Massacre is very hard to write about. It's very contested. The versions that come out of contemporary China are very different to those that come out of contemporary Japan today. It's not settled history. It's very difficult to get your arms around. So it's a tricky thing to write about. I felt I had to kind of attempt it. You can't just pass over it. It was maybe the hardest thing I did in the whole book, actually, with those few pages, was just trying to figure out how to treat the story of Nanjing. I hope it gives some sense of what happened while tying it into the story that I'm trying to tell about the imperial art and Chinese lived experience in the war.